All right, guys, welcome to the show. I got a big one for you today. I'm a little behind schedule. Had some tech problems earlier, but everything's been sorted out. A lot to dive into. So I'm going to start with Biden made a pretty stunning admission about Netanyahu. We'll talk about that. We now have the number of bombs dropped by Israel being revealed by the United Nations. We have Congress goes mentally insane and completely psychopathic. Jon Stewart talks about the Trump verdict and absolutely goes Kulinski on mainstream media. Piers Morgan routs an Israeli government hack. We have massive rent price fixing scandals to discuss. There's a couple companies that are in cahoots, and they're basically robbing everybody who needs an apartment. We have Biden's immigration executive order, and some pro-Palestine protesters block a pride parade. So we got all that and much more. Everybody subscribe to the channel. That helps your boy out quite a bit. I deeply appreciate that. And let's dive in. So the other day, Joe Biden did a pretty lengthy interview with Time magazine. And we're not going to get into all of it here, but most of it was a complete and utter disaster on the issue of Ukraine and Russia. He basically said that Russia's getting their ass kicked. And I think it was Time that did a fact check of that afterwards and said, actually, that's totally true. That's a little misleading, isn't it? That's a little misleading. In fact, most experts agree that Ukraine is in a pretty shitty position right now. They have these new, conscription laws, which are so far above and beyond what's acceptable. They're sending people who have mental issues, and they're sending people who are really elderly to the front lines, and there's disturbing videos of them being forced to go there. And so that's one part. Like I said, we're not going to get too much into that because the Netanyahu portion, man, this one is really wild. So Biden hints Netanyahu is prolonging the Gaza war. U.S. President Joe Biden swiped at Netanyahu in an interview with Time magazine published Tuesday, saying there was, quote, every reason to conclude the Israeli prime minister was dragging out the Gaza war to save himself politically. You don't say. You don't say, Joe. Biden added that he had a major disagreement with Netanyahu over the post-conflict future of Gaza and said Israel has engaged in, quote, inappropriate conduct during the war sparked by the October 7th attack. This is the lipstick on a pig way of describing they're doing war crimes every day. Going after women, going after children. This is the most you're ever going to get from a U.S. president talking about Israel. And some of their conduct has been inappropriate. Oh, is that what you call carpet bombing toddlers? Is it inappropriate? Would you call it inappropriate if Iran did it, or would you call it what it is? A war crime. But he's saying, look, I do think he's prolonging the war because he's trying to save his ass politically. More broadly, the 81-year-old pitched his case in the interview as better placed than Donald Trump to secure the U.S. as the world power on issues ranging from Ukraine to Taiwan and Gaza. So, look, the point that everybody's making is, okay, you're admitting that Netanyahu is the obstacle to peace. So why at the same time does the White House every day insist, and he did it in this same interview, by the way, he goes on to insist, it's Hamas that's not accepting the proposal. You just said Netanyahu is trying to prolong the war to hang on to power. You just said you've had major disagreements with him about the future of Gaza. Everybody knows Israel came out after you announced the peace proposal, and they said, we haven't changed. We need the total destruction of Hamas before anything like that. And now you're pretending like the problem is Hamas and not Israel. Hamas came out and accepted everything that Biden said when it came to that peace proposal. And it was Netanyahu and the Israeli government that rejected it. But at the same time, it's like they're those toys where you pull the string on the back of it and it repeats the same phrase over and over. Hamas is the obstacle to peace. Every single time. That's what they say. Even though they know, and he even admits here, that's not the case. In fact, Biden's proposal was very similar to a Hamas proposal from February. And they keep pretending like it's Hamas that's the obstacle here when it's very clearly Netanyahu and the Israeli government. They are not a partner for peace. It's plain and simple. So he admits this, but then guess what? Of course, is he going to stop sending money? Is he going to stop sending weapons? No, he's not. So yet again, it appears like the very cynical interpretation of what was going on with this announcement of a peace proposal from Biden, it's been proven correct. He's trying to look like the bumbling do-gooder who's just being undercut and it's more a PR management thing to try to distance himself from Netanyahu, while behind the scenes it's still a wink and a nod, like, what am I going to do? I'm not going to actually do anything to stop you. We got more. Since last October, Israel has dropped over 75,000 tons of bombs in the Gaza Strip. 75,000 tons. Exceeding the combined totals dropped on Dresden, Hamburg, and London during World War II. 75,000 tons. And of course, you all know they've dropped 2,000-pound bombs. This is something that's far above and beyond anything even the U.S. would accept during the war in Iraq. I believe the maximum we did then was 500. Why? Because it was our estimation that once you get over that number and you're bombing civilian populated areas, there's no doubt you're going to kill massive numbers of civilians. And Israel looks at that and they go, yummy in my tummy. That's what I want to do. We're going to drop the 2,000-pound bombs. 75,000 tons of bombs. 75,000 tons. And you wonder how we get a situation where Euromed Monitor, the human rights group, says you've killed 92% civilians. Columbia Law Review refused to take down an article on Palestine, so its board of directors nuked the whole website. This went viral the other day. This was a big deal. The British government has denied entry to seriously wounded Palestinian children seeking specialized medical treatment in the UK, sparking calls for humanitarian action. Okay, I'm going to play this video for you. Warning in advance, this is tough to watch. You're going to see a number of kids with severe burns and amputations, and I need you to remember that in Gaza, a lot of these amputations on children were performed without anesthesia. Why? Because the Israeli government wasn't allowing in the anesthesia. So keep that in mind as we watch this.
The pain was so excruciating that Karim begged the doctors to cut off his leg. Because of the war, they had to do it without an anaesthetic. His screams were so loud that people on the floor above thought that someone was giving birth. This 14-year-old boy, who was top of his class and dreamt of owning his own bike, now thinks he'll never ride one again. Two British charities, Project Pure Hope and Save a Child, have written to the Foreign and Home Secretaries, asking them to evacuate Karim and 10 other children to the UK for specialist treatment. Money for their travel and medical costs has already been raised. Their stay in Britain would only be temporary for the course of their treatment. It just needs the British government to sign it off, and they haven't done so. Zaina was injured in a fire after an airstrike on the camp that she was living in. More than a fifth of her small body is covered in second and third degree burns. Her thighs, the palms of her hands, her chest, back, neck, face and forehead. These children aren't just suffering physical pain, they're experiencing deep trauma too.
Her pain keeps getting worse, and sometimes she wakes up screaming at night. She barely eats. Whenever she sees someone in a medical uniform, she panics and starts screaming. She is always afraid.
The hospitals, so damaged by the fighting, cannot give the children the treatment they need. Asleep or awake, they're haunted by the pain of the injuries and the sounds of war. They have a small chance of recovery. Britain, if only they could go there.
Heartbreaking. Remember, guys, Israel bombed over 20 hospitals in Gaza. I remember when the first one happened, there was a bogus debate happening. I think it was a misfired Hamas rocket or Islamic Jihad rocket, and people were screaming at each other about it online. Israel, for a brief period, tried to pretend and do some propaganda that, well, under this particular hospital, there's a Hamas command and control center, and they released some totally, digital images of what they think it might look like. Turns out, of course, that was bogus. Of course, that was not true. But I need you to reflect on this. There was a massive propaganda effort for 2 of the hospital attacks. There's been over 20 hospital attacks. So after a while, they just gave up. They were like, yeah, we're attacking hospitals, we're attacking schools, we're not even going to bother to give you some sort of a bullshit cover story. This is what we do. We bomb hospitals, we bomb schools, we bomb standalone UN buildings, we bomb factories, we bomb homes, we've totally obliterated North Gaza. Over 50% of the population is now homeless. We're starving the entire population. No food, no fuel, no water, no electricity, etc. And this is the result. Haaretz is reporting that the Israeli government paid for an online disinformation influence op aimed explicitly at black U.S. lawmakers and flooding their posts with fake news links about mass rapes and UNRWA being controlled by Hamas. Meanwhile, the people running the operation use hundreds of avatars to aggressively promote purported articles that serve the Israeli narrative, including reports about the sexual assaults by Hamas and about alleged ties between the UN Works Agency and Hamas. The articles were mainly directed at online accounts of black lawmakers in the U.S., particularly Democrats. So you know all the massive meltdown that happened in 2016 over a supposed Russian influence operation, where you had all these Russian bots and they were steering the conversation in the U.S. And, well, it turns out when that was looked into, it was a massive dud. I mean, they literally showed as evidence cartoons of Bernie with a bunch of muscles that had like 7 likes, and they said, see, they're controlling the internet. Here you have an actual online influence campaign, and it's happening from our allies to deflect and obfuscate away from the obvious genocide and ethnic cleansing going on right in front of our eyes. Man, this one... The House of Representatives passed a bill to sanction the ICC, the International Criminal Court, over Israeli arrest warrants. 42 Democrats joined Republicans in passing the bill. Biden is actually opposed to the bill, and he says there are better ways to support Israel. Both Republican and Democratic leaders of the House Foreign Affairs Committee acknowledged the bill is unlikely to become law and expressed willingness to negotiate with the White House on a united response to the ICC's actions. Now remember, we have a law on the books that the U.S. will invade The Hague if they ever come after us or our allies. And this is them adding insult to injury, rubbing some salt in the wound, specifically trying to sanction the ICC and Karim Khan, the head of the ICC, because they're trying to uphold international law and deliver some semblance of justice, and they're going after absolute genocidal maniacs. Guys, remember, this is happening at the same time that the U.S. acts all high and mighty over Russia and Ukraine. When it comes to that conflict, we talk about how Putin is a war criminal and Putin's doing genocide and he's violated all these international laws and we need to hold him accountable and you can't just willy-nilly disregard the rules, the liberal international order. And then we turn around and blow up all of our credibility by defending Netanyahu and sanctioning the ICC for doing their fucking job. Oh, it's beyond dark, man. There was a time when they tried to avoid the appearance of hypocrisy. Now, they just don't care. They just don't care. It's might makes right. It's if you're our ally, you're good. If you're our enemy, you're bad. Full stop. And they will smear and berate anybody who doesn't fall in line and shut their brain off. Trump is desperate for Miriam Adelson's cash. That's, of course, the wife of Sheldon Adelson, who passed away recently. Her condition is West Bank annexation. The former president and convicted felon is holding a fire sale on future presidential authority. Miriam Adelson wants to be his biggest donor, but in return, she wants Israeli sovereignty over the West Bank. Remember, Sheldon Adelson gave Trump $100 million on 2 separate occasions. In return for that, Sheldon Adelson got to control Israel policy. This is why we got the Abraham Accords, which was a massive FU to Palestinians. This is why they moved the embassy to Jerusalem, which helped spark the October 7th attacks. It was him controlling that policy. Trump sold that whole policy sphere. And now, it's batter up again. Miriam Adelson wants Israel to completely annex the West Bank, and she will pay off Trump to those ends. By the way, tell me how this isn't illegal, treasonous foreign influence on our elections. Tell me why it should be legal for AIPAC to brag about buying politicians on a daily basis. They brag about it on Twitter. We just spent millions and millions of dollars to get these fucking hack goons elected who are going to do our bidding. And they don't even hide it, right? There is no doubt that the Israel lobby, the Saudi lobby, the Wall Street lobby, the military-industrial complex, they all have way more control over our government than we do. They don't care what the voters think. They don't care about their constituents. They don't care what the opinion polls show the majority of the American people want or what the majority of their district wants. They don't care. They're not representing us, which is why they could do a genocide and an ethnic cleansing, and all the polls are people saying, stop it, and they don't care. Why? Because they're representing AIPAC. And probably many of them, to some extent, have ideologically bought in to the logic, right? They become ideological Zionists, and that marries up with all the increased money coming from those sectors. Israel cuts off Palestinian banks in Jerusalem off the internet fiber optic cables. It's official. Israel is going to destroy the Palestinian banking system. So this is another thing of here. Look, we've known that they've used October 7th as an excuse to do mission creep in the West Bank. Now understand, Gaza and the West Bank are completely separate. Gaza is run by Hamas. The West Bank is run by the Palestinian Authority. The knock on the Palestinian Authority is that they're collaborators with Israel. They're basically like puppets of Israel. Well, that hasn't stopped illegal Israeli settlers and the Israeli government from taking more and more land, doing more and more settlements in the West Bank, and increasing the levels of violence. We've had a lot of violence break out in the West Bank as well post-October 7th, which, again, by the way, totally blows up this notion that this whole thing is defensive in nature and we're trying to fight back against Hamas and we're trying to stop Hamas. Well, there is no Hamas in the West Bank, and there's still a massive increase in violence from the IDF and the illegal settlers there. And so now there are some really, really troubling signs. I told you guys from the beginning that Israel's goal was, no doubt, to resettle Gaza, to take Gaza. They're barely hiding that. Smotrich, Ben-Gvir, a lot of the top guys are just saying it. They've held conferences about building condos on the beach and taking Gaza back. That's no surprise. But to also try to fully annex the West Bank, they are so far out over their skis. They've gone full genocidal, psychopath, settler, colonial. I mean, I've certainly never seen anything like this in my lifetime. And I don't foresee a pretty ending to this. The entire international community needs to cut off Israel economically, isolate them, sanction them, force them to change their direction, because as Joe Biden has proved over and over again, he's not going to do it. He's not going to step up to the plate. He's not going to sanction them. He's not going to cut off the money and cut off the weapons and condemn them. He's going to virtue signal and pretend like he's against it as he green lights everything. Hey, y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop. And watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.